Welcome, everyone, to Voices of NCAJ, the podcast for the North Carolina Advocates for Justice. I am Amber Nimocks, your host and Director of External Affairs for NCAJ. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our Circle of Leadership members for supporting NCAJ's mission and this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see a list of Circle of Leadership firms at the end of the podcast. To find out how your firm can join the circle, go to ncaj.com/circle. My guest today is Zack Kaplan. He is an associate attorney at the Raleigh firm of Ballew Puryear, where his practice focuses on state and federal constitutional claims, police and prison misconduct, and appellate litigation. He is also co-chair of NCAJ's Law School Outreach Committee and program co-chair of the CLE Overcoming Immunity, Pro Tips for Success in Civil Rights Litigation. That program is coming up on January 29 at NCAJ headquarters in Raleigh. And if you want to attend, you can register for it or any of the other terrific CLEs we have coming up in January and February at ncaj.com/events. Zack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Amber. Happy New Year. And I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say. So I'm excited to chat a bit and to talk specifically about our upcoming CLE.
Great. Well, I'm so glad to know you listen to the podcast. That's awesome. So before we get into the CLE, I'd love to know a little bit about you. I know that you're one of our next fellows, so, somewhat familiar with you and your bio. And I know that lawyer was not your first career. You spent some time in the classroom before you headed to law school. What influenced your decision to become a teacher first?
Yeah, that's right. I was a fifth grade teacher at a public school in East Durham for 3 years in between college and when I went to law school and then became a lawyer. And I loved it. And in a lot of ways, I miss it. And I think that it will end up being, in some ways, my best and most challenging job of my career, I anticipate. But in terms of how I got into it, it was really while I was in college. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and my scholarship program required all of the students to do between 10 and 15 hours a week of work at a local community partner. And so I served for all 4 of my years as a sort of community organizer in 2 different historically Black communities in Chapel Hill, in the north side and in Rogers Road, the neighborhoods are called. And part of my work there was being a tutor for elementary school students and middle school students. And over the course of my years there, I kind of had a practical insight and then a more theoretical insight. The practical insight was that I just loved working with young people and engaging with students, and I found that to be a really challenging, like I said, but enjoyable and meaningful way to spend my time and my energy. And so I knew that I was drawn to the classroom for that reason. But then sort of on a more theoretical level, I really came to understand public education as a bedrock, this kind of foundational principle for building a multiracial democracy. And I knew that I wanted to do work that had that sort of civil rights bend. And so I had in the back of my mind that one day I might more look into the policy world or the law world, but at least at the beginning of my career, I knew that I didn't want to get into policy or get into law or governance or anything like that without having first had some significant classroom experience and kind of that boots on the ground level experience. So I, like I said, I really enjoyed my time as a teacher. I miss it today. Working with adults is great, but it's in a lot of ways less exciting and less dynamic than working with 10-year-olds every day. And I hope sometime, a little bit further down the road in my career to get back into the teaching world one way or another.
That's such a great age, that late elementary school age. You can really see, their brains start to sort of pop.
That's right. And the school that I taught at was actually K through 8. And so we were really fifth grade was really this transition year where you were on the older side of elementary school and on the younger side of middle school. And we definitely saw a lot of transition in that fifth grade year. And I actually, I live in Durham still, and I've lived there for a little over 10 years now. And so I still run into former students of mine all the time. They are now, they have graduated from high school, and most of them are college age. So, if they still live or work around town, every once in a while I'll hear a Mr. Kaplan, and there's only a select group of people that call me Mr. Kaplan, so I know that he must be one of them.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So you knew you wanted to do something policy related, but was there a certain circumstance or a certain event that moved you towards the legal profession?
There's, as with any big kind of life or career transition, there's a lot of kind of factors that went into it, and the timing and everything. But honestly, I would say if I had to give a one word answer, it would be Leandro, which is the major education litigation in North Carolina that's been going on for well over 30 years now, or almost 30
Right.
years now, I suppose. And it is a long running lawsuit where a group of marginalized students and families, or students and families from marginalized school districts and counties, are seeking to enforce their constitutional right to a sound basic education against the state under the provision involving education in our North Carolina Constitution. And I would say it was about my second year in the classroom when I kind of had my feet on the ground enough, and knew my bearings enough to start learning more about the education law and policy world. And Leandro was something that kept on coming up. I would read articles, I would see people speaking about it, I would see in the news occasionally if there was something going on with the litigation. And I was just exceptionally curious about what this was, and I didn't even know that there was a constitutional right to a free public education under our North Carolina Constitution. And the more I dug into it, the more it really, that mission and that purpose really resonated with me. And I started talking to some folks who were either involved in the advocacy or involved in the litigation itself. And of course, many of them were lawyers. And so I began to see a clearer pathway towards, okay, maybe this is a different angle at which I can kind of approach this same civil rights issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that was how you began to be drawn towards civil rights as a focus for your practice.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the elements. It's interesting, and we just finished up with the holiday season and now moving into the new year, so it's a perfect time to kind of be reflecting on kind of the path behind and the path ahead. And like so many people, I really, when I look back at my career path and in some ways my life, there's this mysterious alchemy to it in a lot of ways, where on the one hand you can see certain elements very clearly that, one led to two, led to three, and now I'm here. But on the other hand, there's also some instances of right time and right place, and kind of a sense of the feel of the pieces falling into place in some ways. And so, when I think about my trajectory becoming a civil rights lawyer, it's a little bit of that. There are definitely some elements that stand out, and my experience in the classroom and my experience as a community organizer before the classroom is definitely one of them. I also think that from a very early age, there were a couple of things that kind of pointed me in that direction. One is faith. I am Jewish, and one of the in Judaism, it's called Tikkun Olam, and it means repairing the world. And it kind of, to me at least, it means that everybody has an obligation to do what they can to improve their community. I mean, it's really, it's not just about volunteering, picking up trash on the side of the road once a year, although that can be one way of contributing. It's about really finding what your lane is, that kind of intersection of your passion and your skills, and seeing what you can do to contribute in your community. And so that was always a part of my very much encouraged part of my upbringing, trying to find that angle. And another thing that I think maybe everybody in NCAJ will have in common is I just have a sort of intrinsic commitment to standing up for the little guy. I just have always had a sense of injustice and things that appear fair or unfair. I'm also a middle child, so that might play into it as well. And but I think, like I said, I think in some ways everybody in NCAJ is like that. I don't know if I have met anybody in our organization who doesn't feel some type of way about somebody who, for one reason or another, is marginalized going up against some big institutional power. And so, in that way, I think really everybody, obviously the folks in the civil rights section like me, we have particular types of constitutional rights that we're often litigating in Section 1983 and all that. But more broadly, I really think that everybody in NCAJ is a civil rights lawyer. And I mentioned that I listened to the podcast. I recently listened, for example, to your episode with Karma Henson, and I would challenge anybody to listen to Karma talk about her work in nursing home litigation and say that she is not a civil rights lawyer or a civil rights advocate. I mean, that work is not Section 1983 work necessarily, but that to me, writ large, that's what civil rights litigation is all about. And so there's been elements of all of that, including my time as a teacher, that have kind of brought me to where I am.
Yeah. And that is interesting to hear you say, because that is when I try to tell people, we were talking before we got on to the recording about, trying to explain to my son what I do. And it's not until you become sort of older and begin to understand the civil justice system, and as you become more sophisticated in your understanding, that you do realize that exactly what you just said, that fighting on behalf of the individual against the system, whether or not it is in a traditionally understood civil rights way, or just in a human rights way, just for justice for the individual against who has been wronged, who has had their rights violated, is that is the bedrock of what we do. And that's pretty much, we have just come through the holidays, and you go to parties and what do you do? And like, so I'm the communications director for this group of people, and this group of people does this. And when you put it that way, people go, huh, okay, all right.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said, writ large, it's about standing up for and advocating for the little person, the David versus the Goliath, right? The marginalized person or community against this system of power, whether it's the state, an insurance company, a police force, a jail, an employer, the government. And something that I have found, you mentioned our work with the law school outreach committee. Something that I found through connecting with law students, and that is true of my own experience, is that there's such a pull now more than ever in law schools. There's such a pull towards big law, towards large corporate insurance defense law firms, that anybody who finds their way into this profession, it's highly unlikely that they just kind of stumbled their way into it. So it tends to really draw people who like Karma, or like Sam, who I know you had on recently. I mean, like so many others, and my colleagues in NCAJ Next. It tends to draw in people who really have some type of chip on their shoulder about advocating for folks who have been marginalized and kind of standing up to some of that institutional power.
And, that's one of our challenges as an organization, is at the law school level, is trying to make sure that we educate and spread the word about the fact, because, you're looking at, law school, and you're just incurred a great deal of debt. And, so often the path is that you feel like you have to go work for, you have to go work for insurance, or as an insurance defense litigator, in order to do that. And you don't even, presenting law students with the option of going into plaintiff's work first and making sure they know that that's even an option is really important,
That's right.
because big law is out there,
It's
they
it's
are
not only
like,
out there, it is increasingly recruiting and signing up students earlier and earlier and earlier in your law school career, including, by the way, like now, like January of your 1L year, your first year of law school. I was in touch in the last couple of weeks with law students at a couple of different North Carolina law schools who are in the middle of interviews, not only for positions this coming summer, but for the summer of 2027, right? The summer in between their second and third year of law school, that will then turn into return job offers. And then they're set for when they graduate in the spring of 2028. And that
wow.
once you, it's of course it's always possible to make a pivot if you start to go down that path and then change your mind, but it is much harder to do that as opposed to deciding now when you're at this crucial fork in the road. And so, as you can tell, this is kind of a pedestal that I like to stand on, but I really do think that it's important to kind of spread the word among law students at our North Carolina law schools that this is a viable career path. You can do work that aligns with your values and you can make enough money to pay your bills, because often it is presented as a total dichotomy where you can either go into big law, and of course you're don't have to worry as much on the finance side. You'll be able to pay your law school loans and all that, and you can do work that maybe you have some interest in one type of that law or another, but generally you're probably less likely to be super passionate about that. Or you can go into maybe a government position or a nonprofit position, or become a public defender or an assistant district attorney or something, and do more work that you're passionate about, but at the expense of paying the bills. And for
Mm-hmm.
people who are not independently wealthy, they don't have maybe other lawyers in their family, and they aren't super aware of the different career paths that are out there. That's a really daunting decision to have to make so early on. And so I do think that now more than ever, it is important for folks in NCAJ in formal ways, but also in informal ways, to make some of those mentor mentee connections with law school students and kind of show them that there's this middle path out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're definitely, thankful for all of the work that you've been doing on that front, as co-chair of the Law School Outreach Committee, and we've boosted our efforts there a lot. But I think that, yeah, we've got to continue to be out there and just be present, because there's so many people who don't even know like what a plaintiff's like, even as far into your second or third year in law school, they don't even have a like, like someplace like Campbell would be an exception where they have like a, very active trial lawyer, or their advocacy program is so like huge. But like there are a lot of schools where like understanding really what a plaintiff's attorney is not, we're not competing as well as we
No,
should be.
and in fact, that was my experience, and that was the exact reason why I was interested in joining the Law School Outreach Committee in the first place. And this was, I guess, a year and a half ago now, when it was our first time doing that with the new lawyers division. This is only our second school year with the Law School Outreach Committee. And so I went to Duke for law school, stayed around in Durham, although I will note for the record that I am a Tar Heel. And I
Good to know.
and that was, I had a great, really great experience at Duke Law, but that experience had absolutely or basically no knowledge or understanding or instruction about the fact that this career path was out there, that you could go to a smaller plaintiffs civil rights oriented law firm. And I mentioned that I'm in touch with a lot of law students. I am proud to say that Duke Law. Actually, I was just in touch over the holidays with a student who is starting up a plaintiff's law association at Duke. And so, to your point,
Oh, it's
it
fabulous.
is those sorts of organizations have been established for many years at places like Campbell. I think they're similar at UNC Law, Elon, and NC Central. There's, for example, a Civil Rights Society at Central that's very, very active. But even in some of the schools that are North Carolina law schools that are less well known for placing folks in that career path are starting to get the word out a little bit. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we will keep at it with you for and hopefully we can like I read somewhere that like law school applications are through the roof this year. That there's like a bumper crop,
Mhm.
so there's going to be more and more. Like I don't know. I think that was a nationwide statistic that I read, but I'm sure that it will be spread throughout the country, and so there's even more folks we can target for getting into the
That's right.
profession.
That's right. And it is we will never, as smaller firms and even as an NCAJ organization or kind of coalition, we will never have the exact same approach or exact same sort of infrastructure that some of the big law firms have in their, on-campus interviews and recruitment and stuff like that. But I think that actually makes the mentorship piece even more important, that we don't have as much of that infrastructure to rely on. And again, going back to my experience, I really only became aware that this career path was out there and was viable and was something that would really align with my values and the work that I want to be doing, because I had the great privilege and fortune of clerking for some judges who were former plaintiffs' lawyers. And they were the ones who kind of steered me in that direction. And so it was a direct result of that mentorship and that kind of guidance that I didn't get in law school, but that hopefully more and more people will be getting in law school.
That's right, because you were clerked for Justice Robin
That's right.
Hudson, who was a longtime member of
That's right.
NCAJ.
Before it was
And
NCAJ even. Yep. That's
yes, yes, she was a longtime member of the Academy of Trial Lawyers, North Carolina Academy of Trial
yeah.
Lawyers.
Before she was
So that must have that I'm sure that she pointed you in our direction whenever
She
she.
did. Yeah, she absolutely did. She was a largely a workers' comp attorney when she before she was on the bench, when she was in private practice, and then of course, as any of our workers' comp practitioners in NCAJ know, use that experience once she was on the bench to. She was always the one that when she was on the Court of Appeals that the panel turned to, and when she was on the Supreme Court that the rest of the justices turned to for a lot of not just workers' comp issues, but plaintiffs' issues generally. You will very often find her name at the top of a lot of those opinions, medical malpractice opinions, workers' comp opinions, and really even civil rights opinions writ broadly. I mean, gerrymandering, the most recent Leandro opinion Justice Hudson authored. And so she, selfishly, she had a huge impact on my career, but more importantly than that, she's also had a really big impact on the plaintiff's bar and on the jurisprudence and civil rights in North Carolina.
Yeah, yeah. And then you also clerked for Judge James Wynn on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth
That's
Circuit.
right. That was another both of those opportunities, kind of going back to the serendipity point earlier, where it kind of felt like I was struck by lightning, where right place, right time. With Judge Wynn in particular, I clerked for him briefly while one of his other clerks was out on parental leave. And he knew Justice Hudson, and this was relatively shortly after my time with Justice Hudson. And so that relationship kind of made the connection from my time with Judge Wynn. And very, very similarly to Justice Hudson, he was a plaintiff's lawyer out in Eastern North Carolina. He had a law firm with Congressman Butterfield and a few other folks out there. And they did a lot of whatever came in the door, whether it was workers' comp, whether it was kind of more commercial stuff, lots of smaller claims and working their way up. And then when he was on the bench, and he's of course still on the federal bench now, has had a huge impact when he was in the North Carolina appellate courts and on the Fourth Circuit in state and then federal civil rights issues. So I have been very, very fortunate over the last several years to have some really incredible mentors who not only told me about, hey, this is what NCAJ is, this is what being a plaintiff's lawyer is what being a civil rights lawyer is, but also had more personalized encouragement where they got to know me enough to say, I really think that you should consider this, and let me connect you with a few folks you might want to talk to about it. So I just think that I have my own examples in my own life and career of how valuable that mentorship is. And so that's one of the reasons why I love being able to connect law students with people in NCAJ or judges or clerks or other folks who can kind of provide some of that guidance for them.
And now you're with a firm which has a couple of really great NCAJ members at the top as well.
That's right. Yeah, Matt Ballew and PJ Puryear are our founding partners here at the firm, and they are both NCAJ members. Matt has been an NCAJ member and leader for at least 15 years now. And I have two co-associates now, Trent Turk, who was in the class of 2025 cohort of NCAJ Next, and Catherine Copeland, who recently wrapped up her clerkship with Justice Riggs, who, if we do have a future NCAJ new cohort, we will definitely be encouraging her to join as well. So hopefully we'll do a sweep with the associates there.
Yeah, absolutely. That should be and for 2026, we're going to do the Next Steps program, which will be like a sort of a recap for all of the fellows who've come through the past few years. But for 2027, I'm sure we'll be doing it again because it's been such a tremendous success for us. We've had like such great folks come through, and you guys have all so many of you have like stepped into tremendous like leadership roles in the organization that Next has been just a great program.
I know for me, it was really impactful on several levels. Obviously, connecting with my friends and colleagues who are in our cohort and kind of having that group of people who now, even though it's been 2 years since we were in the program together, we can still be in touch and still bounce ideas off of each other. Plus the mentorship piece with folks in NCAJ who have been in NCAJ for a while. David Henson was my NCAJ Next mentor, and I owe a whole lot to him in terms of being able to navigate this early stage of my career in a lot of ways. And then just getting to know the history of the organization and the mission of the organization. It's something that, it sounds really basic when you say it, but it makes it so that it's not just a listserv, and it's not just convention once a year. And so that was I felt very fortunate to be able to begin my career in private practice with an experience like that.
Oh, that's great. That is great. It's been it has everything that NCAJ has done for Next has Next has like yielded like twice as many blessings back. So it's been a great program for us, including the fact that you're co-chairing this upcoming CLE.
Yes.
Which has an incredible lineup.
Yeah, we are really excited about it, and thank you for highlighting it. And we hope that a lot of members of the civil rights section will attend. But it's also designed such that you don't have to be a civil rights practitioner in order to get a lot out of it. So we heard a lot from our civil rights section members at convention last year that they were interested in particular in hearing from current judges and current appellate judges if possible, because so much of civil rights litigation ends up on appeal. And then also, this one was a little bit of a curveball for me, but I think it makes good sense. There was a big expressed interest from the section members to hear from somebody who's traditionally opposing counsel on the other side of the V and who has experience defending civil rights claims on behalf of, either municipalities or insurance companies. or our classic civil rights litigation defendants. And so we were able to kind of check both of those boxes, or fulfill both of those requests with our panelists and speakers at the event. We're going to have Justice Trey Allen from the North Carolina Supreme Court talk about state law immunities. So things like sovereign immunity or public official immunity. And he was a long time, and is a long time, expert in that field from back when he worked at the UNC School of Government. Wrote a really insightful treatise or kind of pamphlet about state level immunities that civil rights claims often come up against. And then our second program will be from David Coates, who, if NCAJ folks recognize that name, it will either be from being on the other side of the V as defense counsel, or he also does a lot of great mediation work as well. So we were excited to hear his perspective. He'll be speaking about navigating insurance policies, whether it's a municipality or a police department, kind of some of the modern twists or wrinkles that you might find in these insurance policies and how to navigate your way through them or around them. And then last but certainly not least, Justice Anita Earls from the North Carolina Supreme Court is going to be speaking to us a little bit more broadly about how civil rights litigators can use the North Carolina Constitution in civil rights claims, and recent developments in North Carolina constitutional law as it relates to certain civil rights claims. Things like, Leandro obviously is a state constitutional claim, but also, especially after the pandemic, there was a lot of litigation that some of our section members were really leading in a lot of ways behind the fruits of the labor clause, which is another kind of niche clause of the North Carolina Constitution. Of course, we have our own version of equal protection and due process. So Justice Earls will be speaking about how you can consider those claims and how those types of claims have developed over time.
Yeah, that's going to be great. That is going to be a terrific program, and I could definitely see how it would be, something that beyond have an appeal beyond the civil rights section.
Yeah,
sure.
Thank you. Like I said, like we talked about earlier, there is an element in the work that all of us do in NCAJ of advocating for somebody who, for one reason or another, has been put in kind of this marginalized position going up against this larger institutional power. And that the CLE that we'll have later this month is designed to help folks navigate some of the complexities in that, because there are always going to be systemic barriers when you are doing that type of work. And so we're hoping that in a small way, this will be useful in those types of claims.
Yeah, terrific. Well, Zack, thank you for your work on this and for helping us spread the word to potential plaintiffs' lawyers in law school, and for everything you do for NCAJ.
No, thank you very much for having me on and for highlighting our CLE January 29th, and I hope a lot of your listeners will be able to join us.
I do too. As Zack said, that program is on January 29. It is at NCAJ headquarters in Raleigh, or you can attend virtually. And there will be a social after the CLE where you can chat with the attendees and potentially the presenters as well. You can register for that or any of the other terrific CLEs we have coming up in January and February at ncaj.com/events. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's episode sponsor, Advocate Capital. Advocate is passionate about helping plaintiffs' attorneys get better results for clients, mainly through their AdvoTrack case expense funding service. It allows firms to track case expenses and recover borrowing costs, which makes the net cost of borrowing zero on cases they win. Learn more at advocatecapital.com. Thanks everyone for listening, and if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to this channel.